So as you dug into the Bryce Young rookie year and you actually looked at the details of it play by play, what did Bryce Young's rookie season actually look like in Carolina last year?
So on one hand, obviously you look at the numbers, you look at some of the lowlights, I should say. It looks terrible, right? When you actually watch him on film, there is stuff that you want to cling to and stuff that is actually nice. I think as a processor, he was pretty good as a rookie. He is able to go 1 to 2 to 3, generally stay on time, that sort of thing. He kind of had some problems seeing the middle of the field, especially like later coverage rotations. I mean, the Falcons got him on this both times they played him. So I think that was kind of a big issue for him. I think because he's a smaller quarterback and doesn't have the best arm, he kind of has to guess a lot. And I think that's where he can get beat. And so you could say maybe in 2, 3, 4 years, he gets better at guessing. And I think that's possible. But I think
was like that. Where like he had to make decisions based on what he thought the defense was going to do, not what he saw, because he literally couldn't see it. But that was with 10 years time on task.
Exactly.
Like, the time between now and then for Bryce Young, it could get a little hairy in the meantime.
Exactly. And even just there's not a whole lot of Drew Breeses. Like there's just not.
There's one.
Yeah, exactly. There's one guy. And so I think that was the thing, is that when you watch him, it feels like he gets how to play the position. And that's why he's almost such a frustrating player to talk about, because I think if you could just insert his brain into like CJ Stroud, for example, it would look pretty good. Like I really think he has what you need mentally as a player. And honestly, his accuracy when he was kept clean, I thought was actually pretty good. There are a couple throws again where maybe the arm loses a little bit outside the numbers, especially if he's throwing from the far hash, that sort of thing. But like I don't think his arm is like as bad as Tua, for example. Like I think he gets to closer to the threshold for what you need to be good. So like there is some stuff that I thought that you could cling to. At the same time, you saw none of the traits that make a top 10 quarterback. And I think that's what's frustrating when you take a guy first overall. If they took him, late in the first round or something like that, or early in the second, it's like Andy Dalton was never a guy who was going to be in the top 10 ranges because he didn't have that type of talent, but he was like a functional, good NFL starter for certain stretches. And obviously 2015 when they were like the best offense in the league.
It's a very good point to bring up though, because when you can weaponize the rookie quarterback contract to build around that guy in the way that the Bengals were able to in the first 3 or 4 years of Andy Dalton's career, if you have the 12th to 16th best quarterback in the NFL, that's a pathway to victory. The problem is when you get beyond that rookie quarterback deal, having the 12th to 16th best quarterback in the NFL becomes an issue. And that becomes the concern with Bryce Young, is even if you can cling to some bright spots and some silver linings in his game, I think what we saw is in the best case scenario, in the best rosiest timeline, his ceiling is probably more limited than you really want it to be.
100%. And I think, what's funny about that, I think when people talk about what his ceiling could be and what it could look on his best day, people bring up the Packers game, right? Because statistically, it's like his best game. And I think he did have a couple of really good plays. He made like 3-4 really good plays. He still made a lot of bad plays in that game. And they were stuff that like, he didn't have the arm to throw that dig route. Like just certain stuff like that where it's like, I don't know if that can get any better. And that's what is so frustrating about him, is because it just, the stuff that he can't get, like the stuff that he needs to get better at, you can't get better at. But he's already actually kind of good at some of the stuff that you can get better at. And it just makes him like, where is the ceiling really? I think it's hard for him.
When I watched some of the things they did well last year, when you can kind of let him sit back and play point guard, he was good at it. And they didn't use as much empty as I think they should have. And if you look at Canales and what he did with Baker last year, I actually think that formula lends well to what Bryce Young can be. So we'll talk about the pathway forward in a second. The thing that concerns me the most is that what really made him stand out in college is those second reaction plays and those outside of structure plays that he was able to make, and the pocket feel and the pocket movement. When we were discussing him as a prospect, I remember talking about Joe Burrow compared to him, because if you're looking at it in a vacuum, pocket movement and some of those more intangible aspects and feel for the position are the superpowers that both of those guys have. The difference is Joe Burrow is 6'3", 225. He has the requisite physical ability and stature to make that stuff translatable against NFL athletes. My concern with Bryce Young is, even if the talent, you could put it in the same bucket, I'm not sure he's going to have the physical ability to weaponize that skill against NFL athletes. And if you watched him last year, I think that's the answer that we came to, and that to me is one of the most troubling parts of his rookie year.
100%. Like I think he is at the point where it's like, okay, this is a moderately useful part of his game. But the sell coming in was that like, oh, that he can make magic like 5 times a game, and he just like that's Caleb. Caleb can do that. Caleb has the requisite talent.
But look at what Caleb's built like. Look at Caleb's lower half. Look how thick he is. Like I hate talking about players that way, but like,
but
he's
true.
Put together. And that's why thresholds for size exist, because it's only about crossing the threshold. And because he's so far under it, some of the other elements of who he is matter less and are less impactful because we're not checking certain physical boxes.
Exactly. And like, I'm going to do my propaganda again. If you're going to be that small, that skinny, you have to be like really, really fast. You have to be Kyler. And if you're not Kyler,
I can't wait for you to just
stuck in this box.
Every conversation we have about quarterbacks is going to be you trying to sneak in Kyler propaganda here. For people who don't know, Derrik is a big Kyler guy, and I don't think I'm totally sold. And I think it's going to be a consistent sticking point as we do this show this year.
I'll get you there by November.
So as we look forward and we think about how this can get better, what in your mind does a successful second season look like for Bryce Young in Carolina?
So we'll talk about the other 2 quarterbacks we haven't gotten to yet. I think the 4 quarterbacks kind of split into 2 categories, where with Stroud and Richardson, it's like stuff that I want to see from them get better. With Young and Levis, it's more like I just need the things around them to be better so I can properly see what's going on here. And I think with Bryce Young, it's really going to come down to receiver talent. I'm very glad they went and got a guy like Deontay Johnson. For a long time, I haven't even been a very huge Deontay Johnson fan. I think he's a guy who doesn't have a lot of juice, but he will get open. That's will get open. That's what he does. And nobody else in that offense was able to get open last year. They were relying on rookies like Jonathan Mingo, who is not a very good route runner to begin with, and then was a rookie. Like Adam Thielen is kind of reliable in the 1 to 10 yard area, but he's an older guy. He doesn't have as much juice as he used to. So the fact that they just got a guy that Bryce can be like, I think this guy can win one-on-one against man coverage. I think that could be huge in terms of let's see what kinds of throws Bryce can really make, because he was throwing into a lot of tight windows last year, throwing against a lot of from really crowded pockets, which I think is always going to be tough for him. That's the other point. They went out and signed 2 guards. Did they overpay for them? Absolutely. But when you have a quarterback who is 5'10" on a good day and really doesn't have the physical, like the arm to just rip it through that kind of garbage in the pocket, you kind of need to buy him a little bit more space. And they literally went out and bought it. So I do think they took the right steps to see what we can actually get from Bryce in a more stable environment. I just think he has to go out and prove it. So I think a lot of it's just going to come down to like, can he actually make the throws that are going to be there? Because just you didn't see them there a lot of the time last year.
I can get on board with pretty much everything they did from a personnel perspective. Yeah. The Damian Lewis thing is he is not a great pass protector. He's a frustrating player because you see the physicality in the run game, but he's way more inconsistent in pass protection. I think Robert Hunt's probably the same thing, even if he's a little bit better in both of those areas. They're kind of similar players. Right. Hunt's just better at it. So I do think that they probably overpaid for the skill sets, but trying to go out and get those body types, I understand that it is an abstract idea, like trying to go out and get those sorts of things. Deontay Johnson, exact same way. Even Xavier Legette. Like, even if we have concerns about how long he was productive in college, why it took that long, all those kinds of things, this team had no juice whatsoever on yak opportunities last year. None. And they look at it, Bryce was 29th of 32 quarterbacks on EPA per dropback on wide receiver and tight end screens. It was like essentially half a sack every time they threw a wide receiver or tight end screen. If they have a guy that you can just spit the ball out to and potential good things that can happen, that's a huge step forward from where they were a year ago.
100%. And even with the guards, even if they're not the best pass protectors, and they're not, I think there is something about having the attitude of like, we're going to kick ass in the run game now. And
there's no doubt.
We're going to get to more 2nd and 4s. And do you know how many like 2nd and 9 pluses that Bryce Young had to throw? And it was a lot, man. You watch those offenses and it's like, wow, he is constantly behind the sticks. And when you're a rookie constantly behind the sticks, your receivers aren't getting open. It's like, I think like even CJ Stroud we would have recognized that he was going to be a very good NFL quarterback in Carolina. He would not have been like, oh, this is one of the best rookie seasons. Like this team was not ever built for that. So, I'm hoping we can just see a more consistent Bryce Young, because I think my thing with him is I think he can get to that point where he's quarterback 14, 15, 16, giving you solid play. You just have to set up the environment a little bit around him. It's just, again, the thing with him is always going to come down to what is the ceiling, and he probably can't really improve on any of the stuff that would dictate that.
And the Canales part of this, I think, is worth mentioning too. I mean, what he's done the last couple of years from putting quarterback in the right positions to succeed, but also, I don't know what the secret sauce is. We've talked about this a lot, where he had two guys with Baker and Geno who took a lot of sacks at other points in their careers when given opportunities to start. And it wasn't a problem for either of them when they were playing for Canales. So that's a good thing for Bryce to potentially improve. And requires no imagination. We've seen it happen each of the last 3 seasons with the quarterbacks that Canales has been around.
He must be doing something insane, because Geno is truly one of the most baffling cases I've ever seen in terms of a guy who fixed how to stop taking sacks. Like, dude, when he was in New York, it was stunning, like how numb to pressure he was, which like could be good in certain he's almost, we'll talk about Will Levis in a second, just like almost oblivious to everything that's happening around him in the pocket, to what Geno is now, where he's like truthfully one of the best pocket managers in the league. And I have to imagine Canales had some sort of hand in that. It's if he can do any amount of that with Bryce Young, it would be just phenomenal.
It's been fun watching teams over the last year or so add that level of beef to the interior of the offensive line and reap some of the benefits. And I'm not saying that the Panthers are going to be the Bills or the Rams, but if you look at the additions the Bills and the Rams made, both of those teams made those moves for pocket integrity, and then the benefits in the run game were almost like a secondary benefit, where it's like, oh, now we can run the ball like this. But one fuels the other. And I feel like for Carolina, it could maybe go in the opposite way, where like you're going to have the run game first, and then maybe it kind of fuels some more downstream effects that benefit the rest of the offense. And it's a bet that's worked consistently over the last couple of years. The Chiefs, I think, are another good example, right? They go get Tooney, they have Trey Smith, and that shoring up that area of your roster, it's going to bring good things. And I think the Carolina going that same route, you hope that the actual end results are similar, but it's worked out well for some of these other teams.
Right. If nothing else, they're following the right template.
Let's get to our next one here. Let's talk about Will Levis, because Will Levis is somebody that has a much better situation now than he had at the end of his rookie year. We're talking about the additions that the Panthers have made for Bryce Young. The Titans went out, added multiple offensive linemen, multiple receiving options, a play calling offensive head coach. So as you go back and you watch Will Levis's rookie year, what did it actually look like as you dug into the tape and dug into the numbers?
It was as weird as it seemed by the numbers, because like I think we all remember some of the games that he had where he just was incredible one half and terrible the other, that sort of stuff. I think it generally looked like that when you went back and watched every single game that he had. What was so annoying about watching him is he almost was in like the worst kind of bad offense for who he is, because his worst trait, his most toxic trait, is that dude will hold on to the ball and he will try to make the coolest throw on the field, which is like admirable, right? Like I love watching it. Buddy, you're playing behind the worst offensive line in the NFL. Neither of your tackles can play. Like your interior is like all undersized except for Skoronski, who probably didn't play as well as he could have because he was injured. Like it's just, this team was not very good. And almost like the Bryce Young thing, they were in a lot of like 3rd and 8 plus, like 2nd and 11, because the run game was terrible, because the offensive line was terrible. Like, so you didn't even get value out of, having Derrick Henry. Outside of Nuke, the receiving core was pretty desolate. Like even Chigakonkwo was, I think, not the player that people thought he was going to be.
Definitely not. I was excited about him heading into year 2, and it was just, there was nothing there.
Just non-factor. Like I think he might just be stuck as a guy who's like a cool idea, but might not ever get into that, like, is a functionally really good player. He just kind of has that skill set. So I think Will Levis, again, was kind of in that perfect situation to make all of his worst traits look really bad. And I'm really glad that they went out and tried to fix the offensive line, because I think that's going to be the best way to unlock him. Like, I don't think he's a guy where you need to necessarily have the best receiver talent. They kind of needed to just get to average there. They went above average is what they did. But because I think he can throw into tight windows and he's very willing to give his guys chances no matter what, no matter who they are, I think you just need to protect him and protect him from himself. So the fact that they went out and did that, I'm very glad.
Is there something that you maybe thought about him or thought about the season that he had that when you actually dug into the details was different than you had expected, was a little bit surprising?
100%. And actually what Dan Pizzuta from 33rd Team kind of pointed this out before I even started charting Will Levis. When we think of Will Levis, we think of him in like the under center, play action. I mean, I called him Ryan Tannehill before he came out into the draft. Like, that's just the archetype of quarterback that he is. He was actually really good out of empty last year. Shockingly. Like, he was really, really good out of empty. I don't remember exactly what his production numbers were, but he was one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL at empty. Even my numbers, he had like a 65% accuracy rate, which doesn't sound crazy. But when they were getting into empty, they weren't like, oh, we're getting into empty to throw to the flat or throw a screen. They were like real deal. They were trying to throw 10 plus yards because a lot of them would be like, this is their 3rd and 7 call. It's like, we're just going to pray that we can hold up for 2 seconds and this guy will get the ball. If we
can't pass protect and it's 3rd and 7 and you can't add more bodies to the formation, our only chance is to get 5 out immediately.
Yes, 100%. And he did a shockingly good job at it. Because even going back to college, I was like, I think the longer he has the ball, the better a thrower he is, which is perfect because that's what he wants to do anyway. But he was actually really good at throwing from empty. And that was something that I was surprised. I didn't think he had that like, year one, I didn't think he would have that pre-snap acumen to just be like, this is exactly where I need to go with the ball. I'm going to make the throw. He doesn't do some of the like, I mentioned the example of CJ Stroud before where he's like, they're in empty. He's throwing into the flat, but he's like throwing away from the flat defender, like all that stuff. Levis doesn't have that like next level where to put the ball. But in terms of knowing who it needs to go to, I think he actually did a much better job than I anticipated in that. So you still didn't get to see a lot of like true drop back where it's, not empty, but not play action. But the fact that he could go out year one and do some of the hard stuff from empty, I was like, hey, man, that's a pretty good thing to stand on.
You sound pretty optimistic about him. Am I wrong about that?
I want to see where this is going. I'm cautiously optimistic because he checks a lot of the boxes for stuff for the type of quarterback I'm willing to bet on. He's big, has a huge arm. He's a better athlete than like his play style leads on, which again is kind of funny with the Ryan Tannehill thing because I think he's he was a much better athlete than his play style led on. But he also just has this kind of like we were talking about with Stroud, where it's not as refined, but he truly believes he can make every throw on the field. Like you have to have that if you are an NFL quarterback. Like again, does he have the nuance and the understanding yet of how NFL defenses are working and when he can actually try these things? No, absolutely not. He's kind of a meathead. Like that's just the way that he plays the game. But it's very admirable. Like he just has these traits that I think are just like literally admirable is the word, where it's just like that is how the quarterback game should be played. It's funny. I was talking to someone before the draft and they were like, are the Matthew Stafford comparisons good? Like, does that make sense? I was like, it's one of those things where like Matthew Stafford is the dinosaur and Will Levis is like a dino chicken nugget, where it's like in theory this represents it, but he's still like 8 steps away from actually being the thing. But it kind of connects. And so it's maybe in 2 or 3 years he can get closer to being a fully fledged dinosaur.
And if we wanted to play that game, like the Animorphs side of this, like Ryan Tannehill is like some evolutionary path off of Matthew Stafford. Like they share DNA somewhere along the way. If you're thinking about the flaws and the flaws that could potentially become fatal, what would prevent him from getting where he wants to go? What are the stumbling blocks for you?
I would say the biggest one is he might just have Daniel Jones syndrome, where he's just completely oblivious to everything in the pocket. Because like it's that double-edged sword where on one hand, it can unlock these plays from the pocket that are incredible. Like if you are willing to stand in there and take a hit, it's, again, Matthew Stafford. It unlocks these throws that some quarterbacks like a Derek Carr are just never going to get to, and that's cool. It also leaves you exposed to a lot more sacks that other quarterbacks might not take and a lot of bad plays. And if he's not going to be a quarterback who's willing to break the pocket, and he's really not, that becomes a huge problem. So I think that would be my biggest sticking point. The other one is I don't think he's necessarily inaccurate, but he's definitely more of like a line drive to a spot thrower. He's not a very good, I'm going to put some feathery touch on a corner route. Like that's just not something he has in his bag. And I think with the particular type of way that he throws, where kind of a low release, it's a little bit like T-Rex gator arm, just kind of a short, weird release. I just think that that's probably something that he's not ever going to fix, just because you typically see the guys with touch have very just smooth over the top motions. Like it's very fluid. He's a lot more of a rigid thrower, and so that touch is
he's
maybe
too jacked.
just never.
This is my theory about being too jacked as a quarterback.
He's literally too jacked to have touch as a passer, and so those would probably be my 2 sticking points if I was like he can't figure this out.
What does success look like in year 2 for Will Levis in Brian Callahan's offense?
I think if, again, it goes back to Ryan Tannehill, like if they can get back into that We're going to run the ball a little bit better. We're going to unlock this play action stuff. We're actually going to be good at it. Because last year that was all they could kind of do, but they just weren't any good at it.
They were terrible. I mean, I'm looking at the numbers. He was dead last in the NFL, Levis was, on success rate off of play action. Dead last.
It's just we remember the 50-yard bombs that he threw a couple of times.
He was 17th in EPA per dropback. So all it is terrible plays and hugely explosive plays with nothing in between. To be 17th in EPA and dead last in success rate, you can't be further away in the distribution of just decent plays. They did not exist.
They did not. The middle ground did not exist in Tennessee. It was completely out of there. So that's what I want to see from him. Is just like the ability to have consistency in the offense. And I think really this was even an issue kind of with him in college, especially his senior year. He was hurt a little bit and the team was a little bit worse, but like sometimes drive to drive, game to game, he could just be not all the way there. And so I think you just kind of want to see him lock in a little bit. And I think with the receiver talent that they have, I think Callahan coming in is going to be huge. The offensive line being fixed, he should have a better situation where it's like, all right, man, you don't have to make this boneheaded throw right at a defender because you think this is the only way that we can get past the sticks. Like we can think about this a little bit more. You can progress a little bit more. You can take some time to actually do some stuff. So I'm hoping that he can iron that out, but we'll see.
You saying that leaning into the run game and the play action stuff, the Jake Browning offense in the second half of the year for the Bengals, I think that's what this is going to look like because you're trying to help the quarterback, put guardrails on the quarterback as much as you possibly can in the same way they were with Browning. Like that's a way that Brian Callahan is very comfortable playing. The only reason they didn't play like that with Burrow is because of Burrow and his preferences. So you think that sort of deployment, what we saw the Bengals post Joe Burrow offense with Jake Browning look like, is the right approach with a guy like Levis?
100%. I think if you did that,
that's what it's probably going to look like.
I think if you added a little bit more QB run game, a little more boot, like I actually, because again, he's not a bad athlete. You just have to make him an athlete.
That's
like
what Ryan Tannehill.
Exactly. You
like
had to
all
force
of Ryan
him to do
Tannehill's
it.
scrambles and a lot of the rushing damage he did in the Arthur Smith world was him just taking off on keepers.
Yep.
He would just, there'd be grass and he would take grass. So it is really funny that so much of the Ryan Tannehill playbook applies to Will Levis and the fact they played on the same team last year.
Yeah, it really does. And again, that is where it gets tricky though, because it took Tannehill 5-6 years for him to get to that level. We don't know if Levis is going to get that kind of leash, but I do think that like that type of avenue is totally on the board for him, and I think they should lean into that, especially in the red zone with some of the run game stuff. Like especially because he's jacked. Like he's kind of can hit like a hammer. Like Dak Prescott early in his career was like, dude was like 240 for a quarterback. But when you have that kind of guy, like bang between the tackles a little bit, like let this guy go get you a few tough yards. I think he could absolutely do that.
So you have faith in this working, like to an extent.
I don't know if I would like bet on it working, but I probably have more faith in it than the average person.
And more faith than you started with before you charted him.
Yes. That's a good way to put it, yeah.
And this is just a bigger picture question. When you go back and you watch guys, do you find yourself typically, and I know it's case by case basis, but do you find yourself more or less optimistic on average when you actually dig into all of the plays?
I think it definitely depends on the quarterback for sure. I think it also depends very much on how it felt in the season. Because like I think sometimes during the season, stuff can kind of just get away from you.
It does. There's no doubt.
And Bryce Young was, I think, a perfect case of that. Where like when you're watching him by week 14, you're just like, holy shit, this offense sucks. I don't even want to be here. I don't want to watch this, yada, yada, yada. You step back 3-4 months later, you watch him again, and it's like, this is still not good. But there is probably more here than I had thought at the time. And I think that was definitely true of Will Levis. Whereas like when you were watching it at the time, it just felt like, oh, he's going to make 3 cool plays a game and that's going to be it. But there was a little bit more meat and potatoes than I thought to his game. And I thought that was encouraging.
With him and Bryce,
we're
going to see, it's an experiment about how important a situation, how important supporting personnel matters. Yeah. Right? Like when the improvements that they've made, you would hope, and play caller too, like every aspect of what is around them in both of those spots is going to change from year 1 to year 2 in the right direction.
Yeah.
With the last guy here, it was already good and it is going to stay good. And let's talk about Anthony Richardson. Not as many games to worry about. No. So when you dug into the body of work from Anthony Richardson as a rookie, what did it actually look like down in and down out?
I mean, it was kind of exactly what I thought it was going to be, in the sense of they actually had a little bit more on the passing menu than I think people thought they were going to. I think people thought they were going to be purely RPO, purely screens, purely just like run game. Like we're going to completely game this thing up. They had a little bit more like real drop back stuff in there than I think people might have imagined. And he was good at it. Like he knows where to go with the football. Like he can go 1, 2, 3. He can work to the backside. He's very willing to, get immediately to the backside and throw without having to see it open. Like I think that's another thing. Like you have to have the confidence to be like, I don't know if this is open yet, but I know it should be open, and I trust my guy. And I'm just going to make the throw. And he obviously has the arm to do it, so he kind of trusts himself in that sense.
But you can have the arm and not play like that. Justin Fields didn't.
100%, 100%. Like you. That's a great point. It's like you have to have it mentally too, where you are letting yourself unlock your own arm. And I think Anthony Richardson absolutely has that. The other part where it looked exactly where I thought it would, he's just not that accurate right now. Like he's just not really to any level of the field. When I charted him, like he was bad to basically every level in terms of like his best throws obviously look unbelievable. Like you could pick 3 out of a game and it's just like, this is the best thing that I've ever seen.
I wonder if we're too attached to those, though. When I went back and I read your write-up on reception perception, it was like a cold shower.
Yeah.
Because I think I'm excited about this team because I believe in Steichen, and I think that some of the component pieces are intriguing combined with his upside cases. But part of me thinks that we have to like reel ourselves back in a little bit about how much of a potential issue this accuracy stuff is, because it was as bad as you thought it was going to be.
And why I have a little bit of hope for it is I don't think it's just a he can't throw problem. I think there are basically 2 ways a quarterback will learn, which is I'm going to just run myself into a brick wall and see if I can get through it. Or guys that are just like taking things very slowly, like, okay, what is the easiest thing I can get away with? And I'm going to build myself up from there. Anthony Richardson will run into the brick wall and see what he can get away with. And obviously when you have that kind of arm talent, you probably should be playing that way. But when you are constantly trying to do some of the hard stuff and you are already a quarterback who is not all that accurate and you're a rookie, like it's probably going to look inconsistent on a down-to-down basis. And so that's why with him, I'm a little bit more comfortable just being like, okay, the good is so insanely good that this is a player that I want to bet on, especially when the bet on Anthony Richardson is not just on Anthony Richardson, right? And I know we're going to talk about this. It's on Shane Steichen. It's on the offensive line. It's on some of the skill players that they have. Like the environment is so good that it would be really hard for Anthony Richardson to not be some kind of good.
This brings me back to a lot of the conversations we had about him as a prospect and which elements of quarterback play are improvable and which are just you either have it or you don't. It's an innate part of who you are as a player. And I don't want to continue to use Josh Allen as the example because I think Josh Allen is enough of an outlier where if you start chasing that, you're going to make mistakes. But if you look at the trajectory of Josh Allen's career, he obviously had the physical talent from a toolbox perspective from the start. But when you watched him play, he had a feel for the space and he knew where his eyes were supposed to go. Like exactly what you're saying with Anthony Richardson. They're smart and they're unbelievably physically gifted. You can work on the mechanical stuff that improves accuracy. It's all about putting in the time and being around the right people. There's been a million stories about Josh Allen going out to work with Jordan Palmer and some of like the kinetic testing they did about how his body has to move. Well, Anthony Richardson's doing that. Like he's working with Will Hewitt and those guys who've rebuilt the way the guys can throw the football. They're doing all of that like advanced mechanical study of how he's supposed to throw. So if you want to get better, you're really smart and you have unbelievable physical upside. We've had enough examples of that, I think, with Allen and Hurst to a little bit of an extent, that combination of stuff can get you where you want to go. And that's why I still believe it, because I think that he's doing the right things and he has enough of the stuff that you can't teach that I still feel like it's worth making that bet.
100%. Like that's like you can figure out how to get a guy to be on time footwork wise. Like Allen really is the best example. I wrote probably 3-4 different articles during his first 2 years in the league. Some of the worst footwork I've truly ever seen. Like just it just looked like a baby giraffe out of the womb, dude. Like just did not know what he needed to do.
And think about some of the sprays. Like we forget it now because he's a profoundly accurate
now he's insanely accurate. He's like top 5,
which is so crazy. But like you go back and you remember what it was like in 2018 and 2019. And again, I don't want to be swayed too much by this because maybe that's just the exception to the rule. But it feels to me still like Richardson is made of enough of the right stuff that sort of improvement or a version of that sort of improvement can still be in the cards.
Definitely. Yeah, like he'll never be as good as Allen probably. Like that's just such a high bar. But like I watch what Richardson is capable of, and then I watch what the Eagles offense was with Jalen Hurts, and I'm like, I just don't see why he can't at least be that. Like I just don't see why.
But Jalen's accurate.
Jalen is more accurate.
For all of Jalen's deficiencies, and I think that there are enough of them, accuracy is one of his strong points. Where he wants to go with the football, it goes there. And so maybe that's not the right way to think about it. Maybe the most important trait within this sort of system is I just need you to get the ball where I want you to get the ball. And if he can't get there, maybe that's not the right comparison to a guy like Jalen Hurts.
That's a really good point, actually, because I was kind of just thinking like what they are physically, obviously, just in terms of some of the throws that like you said, every throw is on the board for Jalen Hurts. Every throw and more is on the table for Anthony Richardson. But that might be a good point where like Richardson right now doesn't have some of the consistent touch that a guy like Jalen Hurts. I mean, some of Jalen Hurts' best throws are some of those like sail routes he'll throw to Dallas Goedert.
Him throwing the ball outside the numbers, he's one of the best outside the numbers down the field throwers in the NFL.
Yes.
He doesn't have Richardson's pocket feel, I don't think.
Nope.
He's not as creative as a thrower, but at a certain point, like, is that stuff enough? Like, are the upside cases and the upside traits, are we forgetting the actual building blocks of what we need to play the position? And if he can't establish those, is it betraying some of those more advanced skills that we're excited about?
I mean, I think it's a really good point. I guess the argument is always like you can fix some of the...
You can fix accuracy. Yeah, we have examples of being able to fix accuracy. And the mindset on that has changed.
I was just going to say, that's like a new thing where I think 5-6 years ago even, we were just like, guys coming out of college, if they're inaccurate, they're inaccurate. And that's just the way that it is. But like, that's not really the case anymore. Like, I think we've gotten so much better about quarterback coaching and understanding how to get guys where they need to be mentally in the first place so that they're not late and their footwork isn't bad. Like, I think we've gotten so much better about that type of stuff. So.
We have. And I think the football community now believes that. Yeah. From a scouting perspective, I mean, Anthony Richardson would not have been the 4th overall pick in the draft 10 years ago. No. He just wouldn't have been, because we wouldn't have had examples of guys improving that. I mean, I remember when I first started covering the league and you would talk to coaches or just read about the non-negotiable aspects of the position when we talked about prospects. And that was always the thing. Like, you don't get more accurate. That it was one of the cardinal rules of quarterback evaluation from college to the NFL. And it's just not true anymore.
Think about some of the best quarterbacks we've seen recently. Lamar Jackson, he got more accurate in the NFL. Josh Allen got more accurate in the NFL. Jordan Love came out of college, not a consistently accurate player, terrible footwork, much cleaner now. Like, so many of the guys who are in even the top 10, like even the top 5, are guys who came into the league with not even Patrick Mahomes. Obviously, you can't make any case for him for anything, but like, he had weird, unconventional footwork coming into the league. It didn't matter because he's just so insanely talented, but like, I'm glad that as a football community, we're past like getting so hung up on like how footwork works. It's like, it's just the guys who are talented and the guys who have it, they will figure it out.
And that's why I think there's so many people who have probably listened to the collective chorus about Anthony Richardson excitement this offseason and been like, you guys are fucking crazy. Like, what are you talking about? Like, but that's why he's one of those guys where I don't need to see it. Like, I understand the pathway and I can predict the pathway enough that I'm willing to get excited about it before I actually see it, because we've seen this road walked before by other guys.
Yeah, 100%.
All right. Those are the 4 guys we got. Do you have any Aidan O'Connell thoughts that you want to throw out here if we're talking about second-year quarterbacks? We might as well hit that before we go.
I mean, I think we covered most of it when we did the AFC West show.
That's right.
a month or so ago. So I don't think I have a whole lot new to say about Aidan O'Connell.
I saw him throw 2 touchdowns in the red zone period to Jacoby Myers earlier today. Yeah. So that may say more about Jacoby Myers than it does about Aidan O'Connell.
That's the only thing I think I might say about Aidan O'Connell is I'll double down on like they should let him start week 1. That's all I've got. Like, I don't know if it'll be good. I don't know if he'll be the quarterback in 2025, but they should at least see what's going on there.
That's all we got for today. As I mentioned, we're going to be really starting our new cadence here 3 days a week. These are going to be the only 3 shows in the Athletic Football Show feed. You're going to be joining us twice a week from now until the start of the season and then throughout the season, which we're extremely excited about. We've got some fun stuff on tap for you guys. We're going to have a ton of division previews over the next month or so. I'm trying to pick a few things here and there from my training camp travels that we can sprinkle into a couple of these other shows. I have very much enjoyed getting back into the swing of things and just being back around football conversations, getting to watch some of these guys live. it's an exciting time in the calendar, and it's an exciting time, I think, for the Athletic Football Show. And we are very, very pumped to have you. And I can't wait to see what we do this year.
I appreciate it, man. It feels surreal again too, of like, we're done with the first episode. This is my first episode. The 1000th overall. Jesus, stumbling over my words at the end, but it feels incredible, man. Like to have this, to be able to do it in person. Just a really special moment. This was great.